Off, Mu waved his hand, saying goodbye to his first opponent and wishing to meet him again someday. That's when one of the teachers, who was absolutely furious, appeared behind him and ordered him to follow him to the teacher's office. The moment they got there, the teacher exploded, yelling at Mu and asking if he'd completely lost his mind. He demanded to know why he'd done something so wild and reckless to his classmate. At one point, the teacher's anger boiled over, and he attempted to hit Mu with the binder in his hand. But Mu didn't flinch. He didn't even move an inch. Not only was he unbothered by the threat of punishment, but he actually blushed. He looked excited, thrilled even, as if he was already thinking about the chance to fight another opponent soon. Seeing Mu's expression made the teacher change his mind immediately and stop his hand midair. Not wanting to risk the same fate as the student in the hospital, he decided to skip the punishment altogether. Instead, he turned around and told Mu, who he believed was Li Ho, to bring his parents to school tomorrow. Mu had braced himself, expecting to get hit by the teacher, but when the punishment, which meant confirmation of the battle, didn't come, he gave up on the idea of fighting back. Just then, the teacher dismissed him, saying he could leave school earlier than the others. Without saying much, Mu did as he was told and left the school. On his way to Li's house, Mu's mind wandered. Unlike other gods who have complete knowledge of the worlds they're responsible for, Mu wasn't sure what the teacher meant by leave earlier. Was it a suggestion to return to his base, or something else entirely? Since nothing else made sense to him, he assumed it was just that. He decided to use this unexpected free time to heal from the injuries he'd gotten earlier and train his fragile new body. If he wanted to fight more opponents in the future, he needed to get stronger. His hand was visibly shaking from the pain of the damage he'd taken. At that moment, he wished he could use some of his godly powers, like mana, to heal himself faster. Mana, as Mu understood it, was a power beyond what most of humans were capable of. In some places it was called chi or chakra, but most gods referred to it as mana. To put it simply, mana was the life force that existed everywhere in nature. It gave humans extraordinary abilities, allowing them to become hunters in some worlds, wizards in others, or even powerful players in different realms. But here, in this world, Mu couldn't rely on it, no matter how much he wanted to. For now, he would just have to endure the pain and focus on adapting to his new life and body. He tried once again to channel his mana, but it vanished within seconds. This reminded Mu of the moment during his earlier battle, when he'd tried to use mana and failed there too. Frustrated, he finally realized he would need to focus solely on training his physical body and rely entirely on it from now on. Before long, Mu arrived at Li's home and collapsed onto the bed. Knowing that his recovery would take a lot of time, and that there wasn't much he could do about it, he made the decision to return to the god's realm to check on what was happening there. In an instant, just like the day he first came to Earth, his soul shifted back to his original body. As soon as Mu regained consciousness, his eyes widened in shock. Right in front of him, Li Ho was choking the dragonling, refusing to let the poor creature go. The weak boy, who had always been bullied on Earth, now turned to God Mu as soon as he noticed him. Letting go of the dragon, Li approached Mu with a newfound confidence and demanded that Mu hand the dragon over to him. Li didn't know who Mu really was. He had no idea he was talking to a god. All he knew was that he was only temporarily in this realm and would eventually leave again. Li wanted to take control of the dragonling for himself, thinking he could use it to dominate in his new life. Mu, however, didn't like how Li was acting, so arrogant and commanding. Without hesitation, Mu summoned a godly hand and tightly grabbed hold of Li, making it clear that he couldn't just order around his lord like that. Li was completely shocked. He didn't expect this to happen at all, but God Mu didn't care about his protests or complaints and started dragging him off to somewhere else without a second thought. Mu had decided to give the boy a second chance to live in another world, but the look on his face suggested he had something else on his mind. Minutes later, they arrived at the domain of Lucifer, the second-ranked god in the divine realm. Mu entered the scene confidently, his firm steps making it clear to anyone around that he was there. Of course, there wasn't anyone else around except Lucifer himself, who, unlike Mu, was diligently keeping a close eye on his planet, Elmur. Mu marched straight into Lucifer's castle without even bothering to ask for permission, walking in as casually as if Lucifer was just some ordinary guy. Naturally, Lucifer wasn't thrilled about Mu's rude behavior. Without even giving them a chance to explain why they were there, Lucifer immediately rejected whatever it was they wanted, not even bothering to hear them out. But Mu didn't care about Lucifer's opinion in the slightest. He flatly told him to open the gate because he was about to send the boy to the planet Elmur. As expected, Lucifer reminded him that Elmur wasn't Mu's planet, so he had no right to make such a decision. On the other hand, Mu wasn't having it. He leaned in and reminded Lucifer who the stronger god was in this scenario. making it clear that he could do whatever he wanted. To drive his point home, Mu added that if Lucifer doubted his strength, he was more than ready to prove it, anytime, anywhere. Poor Lucifer knew he was no match for Mu, so he couldn't help but tremble in frustration. Seeing Lucifer hesitate and waste time, Mu stepped forward, deciding to handle everything himself without waiting for Lucifer. As Mu approached and touched the surface of Elmer's planet, Lucifer, caught off guard, quickly reminded Mu that interfering with another god's domain was strictly forbidden among the gods. He warned Mu that if a god who isn't in charge of a domain touches it, an unbreakable barrier would activate and block all access. And just as Lucifer said, the barrier appeared. But to his complete disbelief, Mu effortlessly shattered it in seconds, something Lucifer never thought possible. Shocked, Lucifer stared at Mu, who calmly remarked that the rules of the universe could be changed easily if someone truly wanted to change them. Then, Mu opened his godly hand and released Li Ho, urging him to step forward and leap into the hole he had created on Elmer's planet. Li hesitated, clearly scared, but Mu reminded him that this was what he had always asked for, and now the opportunity was right in front of him. Li once again asked Mu to give him the dragonling so he could dominate in his new life, but Mu showed no intention of handing over his own assistant and simply shot Li straight into Elmer's planet, forcefully sending him to Isekai. After that, Mu couldn't help but wonder why kids these days don't want to work for what they want and just expect everything to be handed to them on a silver platter. With things settled and nothing else left to do, Mu turned to Lucifer and casually told him to take good care of the kid before departing. Lucifer, on the other hand, humiliated and seething with anger, could only wish for the power to tear Mu limb from limb. Lucifer's story wasn't so different from Mu's. He was once known as the first demon lord in history, the one who stood above all life on Elmer's planet. After claiming the title of the strongest, Lucifer, in his arrogance, dared to challenge the god who ruled over his world. Back then, in the first moments of their battle, Lucifer summoned a blinding light that quickly transformed into a massive sword, a magical blade far larger than the god himself, and hurled it straight at him. Even the god couldn't withstand the sheer power of the attack. Overwhelmed, he was struck down, split in two by the massive sword, unable to dodge or defend himself. After defeating that god, Lucifer took his place, but even that wasn't enough to satisfy him. He went on to challenge every other god in the divine realm, defeating them one by one and claiming the ultimate throne. As a demon, he became the god of gods. Absolute, invincible, supreme, legendary, and one of a kind among them all. Before long, he earned everyone's respect, something he believed he truly deserved. But his days of glory didn't last. One day, Mu showed up and beat him just like he had crushed all the others before him, completely destroying Lucifer's mighty image in front of everyone. That day, consumed by rage and humiliation, Lucifer made a vow. He promised himself that he would get revenge for this disgrace, cursing Mu as a human-born bastard in his fury. Back to the present, Mu was casually riding atop his dragonling, heading toward his domain, completely unaware that something in the sky was secretly watching him. A demon, most likely sent by Lucifer, was spying on him to figure out what Mu was up to and waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike back. Just like Lucifer, who's counting down the minutes for his chance to get revenge for his humiliation, the bully from Li's school, who had just regained consciousness, couldn't wait to see Li dead. Still lying in his hospital bed, the boy grabbed his phone and decided to call someone tougher to teach Li a lesson. Fueled by burning anger, he scrolled through his contacts until he found the name of that person he was looking for. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, someone was going hard on a punching bag. That guy's name was Kang Cheol, the youth division middleweight boxing champion. His intense training session was suddenly interrupted by an obnoxiously loud ringtone. Annoyed, Kang stopped mid-punch, sweat dripping down his body, and turned to see whose phone was making that ridiculous noise. That's when another guy, a blonde, walked in and casually said it was his phone. He strolled over, picked it up, and answered, sounding irritated. That guy was Hyung Cheol, a boxer with 2 years of experience under his belt. As expected, the caller was none other than the beaten-up bully. With desperation in his voice, and without any introduction, he told Hyung he'd buy him a new phone if he wanted, but asked him to do one small favor first. At first, Hyung was a bit surprised to hear the request, but since it sounded like an easy and good deal, he agreed, and asked what he needed to do in return. The next day, during class, when everything seemed normal again, the bully walked in as if nothing had happened the day before. As he made his way to his seat, the entire classroom suddenly went silent for a moment, with everyone's eyes fixed on him. Then, the murmurs and whispers started. The students were talking about how someone who used to bully others ended up in such a pathetic state. At first, he tried to ignore it, but when the whispers turned into jokes about him being neutered, he couldn't take it anymore. To show he wasn't someone to mess with, he slammed his backpack on the floor and yelled at them, saying he could still take them all down, even when he got neutered. He challenged anyone who doubted his strength to fight him. That's when the class president, a girl with glasses, stood up and shouted back, telling him to either shut up or leave the classroom. Seeing that girl dared to talk to him like that for the first time only made him angrier. Frustrated that even the class president dared to stand up to him, he completely lost it. In a fit of rage, he grabbed a random chair and tried to throw it at her to remind everyone they should fear him like they used to. Before he could do anything, the door suddenly swung open, and a massive Hulk-like teacher walked into the classroom, demanding to know what all the fuss was about. To everyone's surprise, the bully instantly dropped into his seat and acted as if nothing had happened. The teacher looked around and noticed the class president standing, clearly angry. He asked her what was going on and why she was out of her seat. However, the girl didn't spill the truth. Instead, she quickly returned to her seat and assured him it wasn't anything worth mentioning. The teacher didn't press further, but for some reason he told the girl to meet him after class. Something that the girl got curious to know why. When the school day ended, she met him as instructed, and it turned out he wanted a favor. Since she was the class president and someone he could trust, he asked her to check on Lee Ho, who had been absent that day and wasn't answering his phone. In exchange, the teacher promised to write her a recommendation letter for her senior year. It was framed as a request, but the girl knew she couldn't exactly say no. Reluctantly, she agreed. Before long, she found herself standing in front of Lee's house, looking completely uninterested in whatever situation he might be in. Wanting to get this over with as quickly as possible, she didn't waste any time. She walked up to the door and knocked, calling out to see if anyone was home. When no one responded, she hesitated for a moment before deciding to check if the door was locked. Turning the doorknob, she realized it wasn't. To her surprise, the door wasn't locked, so she slowly stepped inside the house. The moment she walked in, she froze in shock. Right there, in front of her, was Lee's lifeless-looking body, surrounded by a filthy room where bugs seemed to be playing hide-and-seek. Lee's appearance was horrifying. His eyes had rolled back completely white, and his mouth was wide open. The sight made the girl scream in terror, thinking Lee was dead. Without wasting another second, she grabbed her phone and called for an ambulance. The paramedics arrived quickly and rushed Lee to the nearest hospital. It didn't take long for the doctors to figure out what had happened. Lee had probably fainted from pure starvation, abandoned by God Mu, who had left his body earlier. He was hospitalized and hooked up to a nutrient IV to stabilize him. Just then, something strange happened. As Lee's body lay still, it suddenly twitched. In an instant, Mu returned to Lee's body. The moment Mu opened his eyes, he was completely disoriented. The place didn't look familiar at all. Confused, he tried to figure out where he was and how he'd ended up there. Before he could make sense of anything, he felt something odd. Looking down, he realized something was attached to his hand. It was the fourth line delivering the nutrient serum. As a god who had lived only for battle and fighting, Mu had no knowledge of human tools or technology in this era, and this strange serum was no exception. He stared at it with a mix of curiosity and unease, trying to process what was happening. Even though he didn't understand what the serum was, God Mu immediately figured out that it was sending something into his body, and only through his vessels. With his godly knowledge of what was happening inside him, it didn't take long for him to realize it was nutrients. He could sense his body absorbing them rapidly, speeding up his recovery. To Mu, it felt like some kind of healing magic, though he knew very well it wasn't magic. As Lee started moving his head around, regaining consciousness, the girl sitting nearby finally noticed he was awake. However, the creepy smile on his face made her think he was a little crazy. Still, she asked if Lee knew what had happened to him that caused him to faint. Not waiting for an answer, she grabbed her bag, stood up, and announced she was heading back to school to report everything to the teacher, as he had asked her to. Mu quickly sat up and tried to stop her. He didn't know who this girl was exactly, but he assumed she was the one who had helped him recover so quickly. However, even after realizing that, he didn't thank her. Instead, in typical Mu fashion, he asked for something else entirely. The girl was in a hurry to leave, but Mu was eager to gather more information about Earth and how people lived here. Pulling the serum out of his hand, he gave his usual creepy smile and asked if she knew a place where he could train to get stronger. The girl turned her head slightly and gave him a side glance. Honestly, in her eyes, this boy looked like anything but an athlete. Add to that the poor, dirty condition of his house. It didn't exactly show if he really cares about sports. Still, after a moment of thought, she suggested a specific place for him. It wasn't anything fancy, just an outdoor gym at a nearby park with some simple workout equipment. Not wasting any time, Mu made his way to the park and began his training. He quickly started doing pull-ups on the bars, pushing his body as hard as he could. When he finally grew tired, he dropped to the ground to take a break, sweat dripping off his body. As he looked around, Mu couldn't help but feel impressed. To him, these simple pieces of exercise equipment looked like professional training tools. It had been almost 4,000 years since he'd last set foot on Earth, and after that, he hadn't bothered to check on human progress as the Earth God. Seeing even these basic workout machines left him in awe. Back in his time, humans trained with something entirely different, primitive methods that were far harder and less efficient. This modern equipment, though simple by human standards, was revolutionary in Mu's eyes. Mu started randomly testing each piece of equipment, even though he had no idea how any of them actually worked. Suddenly, in the middle of his training, something small, like a pebble, hit him on the back and fell to the ground. To his surprise, it was the beaten-up bully from earlier, and this time he had brought someone along, a boxer named Hyung, to fight him. Even with the boxer beside him, the bully acted like a barking dog, yelling insults at Lee from a safe distance but not daring to step closer. Mu couldn't care less about his barking. Calmly, he sat down, picked up the rock, and asked who had thrown it. The beaten-up guy, feeling a little braver now that Hyung was there to back him up, shouted that he was the one who did it. He started ranting about how Lee would pay for hurting him, bragging about how Hyung, his cousin and a professional boxer, was going to beat him to death. But before he could finish explaining, Mu saw an opening and caught him off guard with a sudden punch. The guy hit the ground, screaming in pain as his already broken nose got smashed again. This was the result of starting a fight with God Mu by throwing a stone, and of course, Mu couldn't have been happier about it. That was on Earth, but in the realm of the gods, things were a bit more complicated. The time for the usual meeting of the gods had arrived, but Mu was nowhere to be seen. As his only assistant, the dragonling had to attend the meeting in his place. With his lord absent, the nervous little dragon stuttered as he awkwardly began to deliver Mu's message. Before the dragonling could even get through the first few words of the letter, Lucifer suddenly interrupted. Glaring at the dragon, he demanded to know why a mere assistant dared to step into a meeting meant for gods, let alone speak first, as if he were someone important. Lucifer's intimidating demeanor scared the poor dragonling out of his wits. Panicked, the dragon quickly clarified that he was only there to deliver a message from God Mu and had no intention of disrespecting or offending anyone with his presence. Determined to fulfill his duty and get out of there before things escalated, the dragonling began to read the letter with a trembling voice, but the message turned out to be nothing out of the ordinary. As usual, Mu was simply asking the gods to let him know if they came across any worthy opponents for him to fight. That was it. Lucifer couldn't hold back his anger after hearing that, and slammed the table with a resounding bang. As the second most powerful god in the divine realm, he couldn't stand how Mu not only did whatever he pleased, but now even ignored the meeting and the gods entirely. Lucifer wasn't wrong, and most of the gods silently agreed with him. However, even in Mu's absence, none of them dared to openly criticize him. Lucifer pressed on, declaring that the gods' meeting was meant to ensure the stability and safety of their worlds. As the third strongest god, and of course as someone already in Mu's playthings list, the archer god finally spoke up. He argued that if same as always, any abnormalities occurred, even on Earth, they were the ones who always should take care of them instead of Mu, and that was most unacceptable thing for strongest god among them. Seizing the moment, Lucifer slammed the table again, his voice booming with frustration. He shouted that Mu's habit of treating everything like a game was pushing all the worlds to the brink of collapse. In his opinion, the few times Mu actually decided to solve something usually ended up making things worse. To make his argument more convincing, Lucifer turned to the god of Cyclops, the 9th-ranked deity in the divine realm, and asked if he remembered what Mu had done 1,000 years ago when the Cyclops planet was on the brink of destruction. Back then, a massive ugly creature, as large as the Cyclops planet itself, attacked, a rare being known as a void creature, capable of devouring an entire planet in seconds. Just as the void creature began tearing the Cyclops planet apart, something suddenly shot straight through the middle of it, splitting it into two unequal pieces. That something, of course, was God Mu. With his usual cheerful and flushed face, delighted at the chance for a fight, Mu had effortlessly killed the enormous creature in an instant. Lucifer used this event to drive his point home, trying to make everyone, especially the Cyclops god, see that Mu was to blame for the aftermath of the destruction. He explained that if Mu had cooperated with the other gods instead of acting alone, there wouldn't have been any casualties. Having made his case, and likely swaying the other gods to his side, Lucifer declared that they could no longer stand by and let someone unfit to be a god continue risking the safety of their worlds. On the other side, the dragonling was left speechless. He couldn't do or say anything to defend his lord. The only thing he could do was silently pray,